Hello and welcome, I'm Nick Jones, and on this video we shall be looking at the subject of separation anxiety. Now interestingly, for any of you out there that have dogs with what we might call the pre-existing condition of separation anxiety, or simply a dog that becomes stressed or anxious when left alone, then because we're in this unique situation of living at home with our dogs 24/7, then you may not be struggling too much with that separation anxiety as an issue. Having said that, nighttime separation anxiety can be a slightly different subject, and I have had a couple of messages along those lines which I intend to address live in a Facebook Live coming up. I've got a Facebook Live coming up this Sunday at 3 p.m. That's Sunday the 12th, I believe it is. Now, I've been putting pen to paper to create some thoughts for you on the subject of separation anxiety, because what we don't want to do, of course, is when we do inevitably return to work later down the line, is for our dog to be suddenly put in a position where it is alone, and that your company, your talking and chatting, touching, interacting with the dog, it all goes from quite a lot to nothing potentially for some of you. And so what we want to do during this period is to ensure that any little problems of that description are not creeping in. Okay, so what I have created are what I see as two main strategies for your dogs during the coronavirus lockdown that help specifically with the subject of separation anxiety. Now, one of the headings is maintaining the basic standard that you should already have with your dog. So we're maintaining standards on one hand, and then on the other hand, we're really looking at specific measures that we can keep in place to help prevent separation anxiety. Now, I think it's fair to say that some dogs tend to have a greater disposition towards developing separation anxiety than others. And I don't mean that in the sense of certain breeds, although that can be true as well, but just some dogs. I think some dogs have just under the surface this propensity to develop separation anxiety, and it can be quite dramatic changes that we're experiencing now, and especially when you return to work, that can trigger your dog's anxious behaviour. And so this is something really important to me, because I see this sort of behaviour occurring a lot in my day-to-day consulting work, and I know firsthand how disruptive, how upsetting, how restrictive it can be for the owner, and of course it's the dog going through directly that anxiety, and that's not good or healthy for the dog either. So let's come back to this idea of having the two main strategies. A quick reminder: one is maintaining the basics, which I'll come back to shortly, and the other is putting certain measures in place to help stop separation anxiety in the first place. By the way, a lot of those basic measures to help prevent separation anxiety can also be implemented to help treat separation anxiety, although I would usually, of course, prefer to have a specific set of behaviours or circumstances to be aware of that for particular cases. And what I'm trying to say here is that we would put together a plan of action that would be specific to you and your dog. So, without any further ado, let's come back to this first idea of maintaining the basic standards. Now, I'm going to make a running assumption that you already have a good degree of what we might call a basic standard, or a platform or a foundation that you consider your dog to be generally under control and behaving in a manner that you are happy with. But to give you some ideas, some keywords that I look for in a dog in the home and out of the home, but some keywords are things like manners. So we want our dog to be mannerly. We want our dog, especially in the home, to be calm. It can play, of course, and do things and interact with you and others, but we essentially, what I mean by calm is that we don't want a dog bouncing off the wall. So the home is a place for calm behaviour. we want our dogs to be polite. Okay, looking to be given permission to do something. Not everything, but maybe main things which I'll elaborate upon later, such as doorways and being given permission to eat its dinner. That small, simple, but effective things of that nature. And we also want our dogs to be respectful. Well, what do I mean by that? That sounds quite a heavy word, but certainly a respectful dog would not be doing anything really unpleasant or untoward, such as grabbing clothing or your hands or your feet or anything of that nature, where we could sort of say that the dog is getting a bit out of hand and it goes beyond play. Okay, so that's what I mean by respectful behaviour. Now, we don't, and I certainly don't expect you all to live with your dogs like that 24/7, life like a military drill. That's not the case at all. We can still integrate and carry on with having fun, joyous relationships with our dogs, where we're integrating appropriate levels of exercise for the breed and the age, where we're playing with the dogs, we're using brain games, things of that nature. So when you look at those two elements, it sort of creates that positive tension. So we have the manners, the calm behaviour, the politeness on one hand, but to balance it off, we then have the fun and the enjoyment, the exercise and the brain games on the other hand. And when we have those two elements balanced off nicely, well, we have a balance. And that's really what I want you to achieve with your dog or dogs at home. So let's look at some specific examples of simple things you can do in your home with your dog or dogs on a daily basis, where you're really addressing the little functions that in fact we all or most of us do with our dogs every day. So one example is the sit and wait, or the stand and wait, just the simple concept of the dog waiting. So we could ask our dog to wait before we go through a doorway. You may be going first, or you may just be opening the door and then allowing your dog to go. But the key point is that you're not a door opening service, and as soon as the door opens we allow our dogs to sort of rush or push or barge excitedly. Really what we're trying to do here is to slow the dog down. Okay, so getting that wait in place is really important. Sticking with the waiting exercise, asking your dog to wait before allowing it to eat its food is also a helpful one. I do nothing more than 5 seconds, so I put the bowl, ask the dog to sit, put the bowl on the floor, I do the wait, count to 5 in my head, and then give the OK command. We can also ask our dog to sit and wait before being petted. You're not also an automatic response to your dog approaching you, or at least I'd rather you were not, so that every time your dog approaches you, the hand comes out automatically and your dog is effectively taking attention from you whenever it pleases. Okay. Also sits and waits before your dog has access to privileged locations. So one that comes to mind is that you are placing your dog in the sit and wait before you say, up you come onto the sofa, or maybe on your bed, or any other sort of dog specific area that you use. Naturally, if the dog has its own beds, it can move in and out of those without your permission. Another example of maintaining the basic standards, let's look at meal times and food manners. Okay, so what we're really looking for here, as I've just touched on above, was the sitting and waiting before eating. Also, that when you are eating, your dog is not begging, it's not sitting square in front of you waiting for some food. These things in themselves are not the end of the world, but remember really what we're trying to do here is to have a nice rounded collective approach so that your dog understands that there are some sensible balance rules within the household. So no begging, no dogs under the table whilst you're eating, no handing food to your dogs please whilst you're eating, and that the dog should not be encroaching upon any family member whilst they're eating, including children, especially very young children that don't have the awareness or wherewithal to say to the dog, away, lie down over there, I'm eating my food, this is my food, not yours. Naturally, if you have any healthy leftover scraps, then put them in the kitchen, in a bowl, in the fridge, and either use that food as treat food for you to work with your dog, or you could be giving that food in your dog's bowl on its next meal. Privileged locations. So stick to the plan of what works and is agreed as a family. If you allow sofa access, fine, but please ask your dogs to sit and wait before saying, okay then, up you come. It's really when you lose control of these privileged locations that we can have some difficulties. So consistency across the family members as to your plan as to how you give access to privileged locations is really important. Doorways. Please don't allow your dogs to barge past you. This is especially important with bigger dogs, but fundamentally it's important with dogs of all sizes. But of course, the bigger the dog, the bigger the issue on a physical management point of view. So please ask for your dogs to sit and wait. You open the door, you wait, you ask for the wait, and then your dog can go through the doorway when you give permission. So as I said earlier, you'll either be going out yourself, at which point you would go first, then encourage your dog to come out with you. Or if you say, for example, just letting your dog out into the garden for a toilet break, just get it to sit and wait on the step, count to 5 seconds with the door open, and then give the OK command. Let's look at the second section of this video where we're looking at measures to help prevent separation anxiety in the first place. Owners with dogs that already have separation anxiety are not so much an issue as you're together, and this may need to be addressed under a separate one-to-one later on, because the subject of separation anxiety can be really very broad, and the different permutations I find within this heading, as I say, can be very wide, and so you may need specific one-to-one help later on. But putting that aside, these are good ways to help keep the status quo for those of you that are home with your dogs all day at the moment, and so when you are returning to work later on, we hope that your dog can manage and cope with that change in its day-to-day circumstances. What I've done within this heading is to break it into 2 subsections. 1, behaviours that occur within the home, and then 2, the behaviours that occur what I've called out of the home. And what I mean by this is you coming and going, and that is also something we really need to look at, especially for later on when you return to work. So in the home, we need to look at your day-to-day interactions. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with you being home with your dog 24/7. We here are at home with our dogs on a daily basis, but we of course do have comings and goings, and the dogs are left alone at night, of course, but also for a few hours each day, and we purposefully build that in. So if we're leaving the home, the dogs are put away on their own, and that we are satisfied that they can cope with that time alone. So leaving your dogs home alone for short spells with a distraction device such as a Kong Classic or a Kong Wobbler, see my videos I made last week on that, can be a very good way to keep your dog busy in your absence. And a busy dog, a distracted dog, is usually not a dog that's getting stressed. So this can be a fundamentally good way to show your dog that in your absence it's not a bad thing. There's nothing to become distressed about, and that the dog can be quite happy in the knowledge that you return, especially when it sees that Kong or that toy device that releases food, and it knows that it can relax in the knowledge that you're coming back. Attention-seeking behaviour. This can take on many different forms, but be sure that you're giving attention to your dog on your terms, not when the dog is expressly requesting it. So you may be in a position where you choose to literally ignore your dog's attention-seeking efforts, either simply by blanking it and looking the other way, or continuing to read the paper. And most dogs will give up behaviours that are non-productive, and so you should then see your dog give up really and go and lie down and relax, which is really what we want. You can of course give your dog attention, but be much more mindful about this subject, and then try to ensure that it's being given on your terms, not your dog's. Maybe your dog follows you around everywhere. Is your dog your shadow? This is indicative of a dog that may have some underlying concerns about where you are and not wishing to be left alone. Now, many dogs will naturally want to be with you throughout the day, and again, please don't confuse that desire to be with you with a dog that simply cannot be left alone. So it's okay if you, say, move from one room to another and spend a prolonged period in that room, say working on a laptop or relaxing with a cup of tea in the paper. But if you find that you, when you attempt to go to the bathroom or into the kitchen to make a drink for a few minutes, and your dog is right there, right on your heel, then that's not the relaxed behaviour that I would encourage you to establish. So that is something that I would encourage you to prevent. Now, if you have a partner in the house, you could either get them to hold the dog, let's say in the lounge, whilst you go into the kitchen for a few minutes, or if you are home alone, then you may need to say to your dog to stay or wait, depending on which words you use, and then to close the door behind you. Okay, and get your dog used to being placed in a room on its own for short, sensible periods initially, and then we can build those up over time. Finally, we are looking at managing sleep and rest areas. Most dogs tend to sleep in a room on their own, such as the kitchen or a utility room, without any difficulty. So maintain that if that's what you're already doing. And I'm also aware that some dogs sleep in bedrooms with dogs. So this is where we're getting into interesting territory, because inherently I'm not against dogs on the bed, although I personally recommend that dogs do sleep in a room away from the owner, simply and often because of this reason, separation anxiety. If we allow a dog to be with us 24/7 in the day and at night, then when you do choose to go out of the house, the dog can find it a bit of a challenge. So whilst I do usually recommend dogs don't sleep in the bedroom, I'm not inherently against it, especially if you have that as an ongoing arrangement and the dog is okay and doesn't show any signs of separation anxiety. So rest areas as well, be sure that you are able to control those rest areas and that your dog isn't taking advantage of jumping all over the sofa, and that you can't control your dog. The second measure to help prevent separation anxiety really looks at behaviour of your dog as you come and go from your own home. Not so relevant for a lot of us at the moment, although of course we are still leaving the home where appropriate to do so. But especially for those that have a more of a daily routine where they may be going to work, maybe going to help family members, all sorts of different circumstances that basically mean that we're leaving the house and then returning. And here's some key areas for you to cope in that respect. Test your dog. How does your dog react to being left alone, and how long can it be left alone for? Now, under most circumstances and depending on the age of the dog, we might be looking at a maximum between 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 hours, depending on what you know your dog can already cope with. It would be completely inappropriate to leave a dog with separation anxiety for 4 hours to teach him to get used to it. It's going to fall over, it's not going to work. So we need to build those departure times up gradually. One excellent way of establishing your dog's behaviour in your absence is simply to record him or her. So usually audio recordings are adequate, because then we can hear any whimpering, crying, barking, scratching, things that all cause noise, and we can pretty much guess the rest. But if you have a video device that you can monitor your dog's behaviour when you're out of the home, that can also be useful. And they of course have audio as well, so that covers off both eventualities. When you do leave the home, be sure to leave your dog in a suitable location. So you're thinking of things like a dog crate, maybe a utility room, something like a kitchen. Basically a location where you know your dog can cope in that area and your dog is safe. So once you have a basic feel of how long your dog can be left for, the behaviour of your dog in your absence, depending on where you are, we then need to build up these sessions, and ideally if you could reach something like the duration of being able to leave your dog for 1 hour, then that's a good platform. And then very often I find all the messy bits are building up to the hour, and once we have an hour then we can begin to fine-tune it a little. But that's going to be the starting point at this point in time, okay? House returns. When you come back home after being out for a period of time, be sure to make your return calm. Don't have a party with your dog when you come back, regardless of how pleased you are to see him and how pleased he is to see you. It's the responsibility is on you to play it cool and relaxed. I advocate that you ignore your dog initially. Wait for the excitement to settle down, and once you feel your dog is calm enough and you can call him to you, ask him to sit and then to pet him in a calm way, then I am happy with that. So depending on where your dog is at the moment, how long you ignore your dog before you attempt the call to you in some calm affection, that can vary. But think along the lines of anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes of you coming home and ignoring your dog, and then having a greeting with your dog. During that 5 or 10 minute period, of course, it allows you to get your priorities right, which is to say hello to family members first, do anything else that needs to be done of a pressing nature, and then think, right, where's that dog? Come here then, sit down, and you can have a nice little fuss up. And that greatly helps set your dog's expectations, and that can help your dog. Interestingly, I found that the tone of your greeting can really have quite an impact on how your dog feels when it's left alone. Okay? Departures of the house, of course, should also be calm. Don't fuss your dog up or get the dog's emotional state high in any way as you leave the home. Let your dog see the cues of you leaving, so maybe picking up keys, your phone, putting a jacket on, saying goodbye to people, or simply leaving and telling your dog to stay as you do so. So that is something also worth integrating. So there you have it. Remember, it's about keeping a balanced approach. And on one hand, we're doing something to maintain the basic standards we should already have with our dogs, as covered in the beginning of this video. And then on the other hand, we're looking at some specific measures that you can implement, simple measures that you can implement to help ensure that your dog doesn't either develop separation anxiety, and indeed, if you feel there's an element of separation anxiety in your dog, you can carry out those measures also. Thank you for watching and listening. I hope you find something of interest and help there. As I've said a couple of times throughout, I can't really cover every eventuality in this video, so if you have specific concerns, please be sure to drop me a comment. If you could also like and share or subscribe any of the things that we do on social media to help send this media to others, that's greatly appreciated. So until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other, and thanks for watching.